From the Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I asked the Premier to table the 2012 Internal Government Review of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, but he would not commit to tabling the document. Subsequently, I submitted a written question requesting its release, and I still wait for a reply. Am I the only one that finds it ironic that the Premier is being so secretive with a report that relates directly to access to information? A question to the Premier: why are you so reluctant to release this 2012 internal review?
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The written question is with the Department, and I'm not sure if I declined to release. I think that comments were made in a different context. Whether it even was a question, I'm not sure. But in any event, Mr. Speaker, we have a FOIP review underway, and I'm quite prepared to go back and work with the Department on the question of that 2012 review, and for that to be part of the background as Islanders and members of this House are invited to respond to that FOIP review. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Premier. The Honourable Leader of the Third Party, your first supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, last week the Premier announced a discussion paper on FOIP, and considering government has had 2.5 years since it first committed to a review of the Act, I was sort of disappointed when I read it to see the lack of analysis or of new information. Almost everything in that paper has already been discussed extensively, was either in the Privacy Commissioner's latest review or is information you would expect to find in a regular annual report. It offers no original research or visionary thinking. A question to the Premier: will you table all of the background information, including jurisdictional scans, budget forecasts, previous reports, reviews and public comments that informed the preparation of this paper?
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to take a look at what's currently on that landing page for people to respond to the FOIP review, and quite happy to take a look to see if there is further information along the lines suggested by the Leader of the Third Party to enhance the ability of Islanders to respond to this FOIP review. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Premier. The Honourable Leader of the Third Party, your second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I personally believe it's critical that all Islanders have access to all information regarding this Act, and I'm not sure what results the Premier expects to receive through this consultation if he refuses to provide the public with all of the relevant information they require. Premier, perhaps you could explain what you actually mean when you say openness and transparency, because this process appears to be neither open nor transparent, more like closed and opaque. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I believe I've said twice here today that I will take a look at the landing page, that the invitation. The question that arose, that was first raised, was whether the invitation was sufficiently presented and informed that Islanders could make their views known, make suggestions, engage in this process, which is entirely the objective and indeed the overriding spirit of our FOIP legislation, and it indeed has force in this province, and I'm proud to say that's the case. So, Mr. Speaker, we haven't declined to do anything. We are very keen to have Islanders' views, and that take place in the spirit of openness and transparency. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Premier.